started off initially studying acting at Juilliard, and then I came home from school and left Juilliard to go home to San Francisco. I couldn't find acting work, so I started doing stand-up comedy. And then the stand-up comedy eventually led me back into acting, so I think it was kind of a backdoor thing. And then I got an audition initially for, if you're talking about getting into film and TV, I had an audition for a kind of a spin-off on Happy Days, because Gary Marshall's kid had seen Star Wars and wanted an alien on Star Wars, and Gary was like, I don't know if you can have an alien on Star Wars, and so I ended up writing this one-off character, Mork, to be on Happy Days, and I auditioned and got the part, and that was cool, it did well. And then eventually there was some commitment that Paramount had to ABC where they had to put a series on, so immediately they threw together Mork, and they found Pam, who had done a series, and they made Mork and Mindy, which was this big break for me. But that was really kind of a lucky coincidence. The Discovery Channel. I always, just the fact that it talks about animal behavior. I'm watching monkeys most of the day. For me, that's always been my favorite thing to watch on TV. It's always the science channels, big time. My favorite thing, there was a thing on the Discovery Channel once, there was this one bird, beautiful male bird, he had this whole thing, he had plumage like this, and he's doing this dance like, check it out, love me, check me out, love me, and the female just went, no. And you could see the male penguin go, bitch. This bird just was like, oh, bitch, I gotta start over now. But that's why I love watching it. Real animals, real behavior, call now. Just keep going, find that thing you love, because it's tough work. And my father gave me this advice when I said I wanted to be an actor. He said, have a backup profession like welding. But I think if you can find that thing that really gives you joy, that'll be it. Because for me, it's always been comedy and stand-up and acting too, because of exploring behavior. But it's tough work, and if you can get it, even better. Good luck.
Yeah, I always say, just you got to keep trying, you got to keep going. You can't worry about feeling rejected. I always say, if you don't go, you'll never know. That's to an audition, say. An audition that you know already, say if it's in the theater, I don't know, I haven't gone to an audition for a while. There have been some situations where I say, let's have a reading of this. The director, the writer, and I say, let's have a reading of this, a table reading, and let's read it for all of us. Let's make sure you really want me for this and that I feel I'm right. I have done that in the last couple of years from time to time. Even though a table reading is kind of it's kind of a laid back, you're not performing, you're just doing what you can do without getting all worked up. But I always tell young actors when you go to meet a director and you're reading for something, don't be afraid to take chances and follow your instinct, even though it's wrong. If it's your gut instinct, follow it, because you're not going to get the part. So at least the casting director, more importantly than the director, will notice that and say to the next director, I have somebody who is interesting. They're not what you have in mind for this part, but I think you should meet them, because that could be where that director would say, you know what, they're not the way I envisioned this character, but they are working and they're so interesting in what they're doing, I'd rather use them.
I think that particularly in this country, young actors are encouraged by those around them, the agents, the managers, the whoever, to always be the same.
Yes.
Not to act, because heaven forbid that the audience should not recognize them the minute they walk on.
Yes.
And in England, maybe it's something to do with the old tradition, maybe it's something to do with the size of the country, which, as you know, is minute, and a history of repertory theatre where if you didn't turn up with a different performance next week, you'd be out of a job. Exactly. You've got to come on and be different. Right. I mean, that's encouraged. Yeah. So Olivier always said that it was the greatest compliment if he could actually, he, after all, was so well known as his career went along, that if he could walk on the stage and fool the audience for however many seconds or minutes so that they didn't know it was him. That was a supreme compliment. A young actor today...
They want to be recognized.
Well, they want to be recognized, but also they're told you must be. Universality is a trap. because then nobody knows what to do with you, supposedly. And I think that there are probably a great many actors who could be far more versatile, but they're always told, you know, wear the same. I mean, how many times do you now see actors? They never change their hairstyle, they never change their voice, they never change their physical appearance, and they play this range of characters, and it comes from that concept of making all the characters become you, as opposed to making you become the characters. And it's just not all American actors do that now. There are some wonderful chameleons. I mean, while we do always know it's Dustin Hoffman, he sure as hell takes some wonderful chances in turning into other people. Meryl Streep, you could say, well, there's that Meryl Streep stamp that we always know it's Meryl Streep, but she sure turns into other people. She doesn't just play Meryl Streep.
I mean, that my first job and how I started to approach what I was doing, even though I don't know if I really knew what I was doing, was, okay, I may not be this guy, but if I know who this guy is, or I know someone like this, whether they're that way in real life or it's how I perceive them. I'll tell a quick funny story on the way to learning what it is that I do, and some pitfalls that I learned along the way. Dazed and confused, I ended up working for 3 weeks. There was a lot of improvisation. The other actors in there were lobbing me lines, and I remember having a feeling like, boy, I feel like you could put a blindfold on me and I can be this guy. I feel like you could blindfold me, press record, and put me in any situation, and I'll go to the 7-Eleven. I can buy. I remember going, what would they buy with $5 at the 7-Eleven, or what world that character lives in? What would they know? What they would buy, what they would wear, what they would do in any kind of situation. Well, after about 3 weeks on that, which was as I said, a lot of improvisation, I went on back to school, came back out to Los Angeles, and got a few roles, and it was around Boys on the Side. I had played a few very conservative roles, and I had about a year and a half where I would audition, and I would get 1 callback, 2 callbacks, 3 callbacks, and I never got the part. And I remember feeling like I'm too tight. You know what I mean? I think maybe I'm studying too much. I remember talking to myself, and maybe I'm studying too much about the import of the line and everything. And you know what? I think I need to go back to doing what I did when I first started, which is I was just a guy and I improvised. So I had a film that I was cast for, and I was playing this on-the-border Mexican drug lord. And I told myself, I said, I'm not going to look at the sides. I'm not even going to read the script. It's an on-the-border Mexican drug lord. I hear the synopsis. If I know my man, then I'll show up and just, obviously, I'll read it right before I go on. And if I know my man, that'll be like, well, that's exactly what he'd say. Foolish. I go to set that morning. All right, all I got to do is have a glance at it, and it'll be like, yep, I know how to do it. Well, I look at it right before we're about to say action, and it was a 1.5-page monologue in Spanish. Oh, and I remember I felt this drip of sweat come up on the back of my head and go down, and I for whatever reason, I looked over and I said, Can you give me about 12 minutes? Why I said 12 minutes, I don't know. I figured it was like not long enough to be inconsiderate, but long enough to maybe get a little bit of that stuff. Anyway, I think I was horrible in it. I stammered through some Spanish and tried to look at lines. So then I was like, okay, that's not the way to go. There's a blend here of having to do your due diligence, do your studying, but then being able to go there on the day and relax and throw it all away.
You've done all the exercises that have to do with staying in the moment. You know, I think the worst thing ever that an actor can do is determine the result of a scene before coming in to play it. If you've done your preparation, and you all know what that means, I mean, and again, it's a real specific discipline, and it has to do with your state of relaxation, and it has to do with your sensory work that you've done, and it has to do with your emotional recall and all the different things that are the tools that you have to work with. And if you've done your preparation and then you let everything go and leave it entirely up to your imagination in the moment, you're almost always bound to find the right sequence of emotions. You know, and one emotion will inform the next emotion, which will, you know, I mean, it's like, if you think of rage, you know, you don't want to think, okay, now I've got to get to this point of rage. How am I going to do that? You know, if you start with the absolute most simplest thing, I find a lot of times all you have to do is to find that first real truthful moment. And if it is absolutely truthful, then everything else follows in its natural course.
I think it's best when a director is prepared, knows what they want. If they know how to talk to actors, that's good. I mean, De Niro was very good in little physical bits, you know, like in little behavioral things. So was Robert Redford. Some directors are less sure, actor directors are less sure of themselves. They keep wanting to explore, and you know, they didn't know how they want to shoot it or not. So I think it's good if you know how to talk to an actor. The older directors, a lot of them were actors, or studied or did theater or whatever, and I think, you know, they were able to get certain kinds of performances out of people, maybe multi-dimensional performances. Now, younger directors don't train that way. They don't train in acting classes. They don't do theater. And I think younger people are more comfortable maybe initially in front of the camera. They're more relaxed because they grow up with all these video cameras and, you know, the internet, and you're doing this and that. But that doesn't necessarily mean their performances are more complex. Or maybe they can give one or two complex performances as a young performer, but they don't maybe haven't developed the craft of how to attack something that's really difficult, material way beyond them, like you get to do in the theater, or with a great acting class, with those old great teachers who really did change acting. You know, Stella Adler and Sandy Meisner and Strasberg and all those people. The people who were trained out of them, you know, were really well trained and were wonderful actors. Like, you know, take guys like Duvall and De Niro and Marlon Brando studied with Stella Adler, and they gave multi-dimensional performances. So I don't think it hurts if you're aware of that, but some actors can get frustrated too because they know how to do it, you know, and they may not be the most patient sometimes, you know, who are directing. So it really depends upon what the movie is and, you know, what the situation is. It's some people, like they're directors who write something so they understand where it comes from, but they don't know how to talk to you about it. And that's okay. Sometimes you can translate for them. Well, a lot of times younger directors want it the way it's in their head, and that can never be, because you're different than them. You're just a different person, but you can get the sense of what they, you know, what they're after.
Look, you know, I've done these films with them, and I've had an incredible opportunity to learn from, you know, one of the greatest artists of our time. But to tell you the truth, I'm so focused on what I'm doing every single day that it's so hard to pick up. You know, people have asked me if I want to direct, but it's so hard to pick up on what he's doing in his process, because I'm off in my own world, and then we connect together. But he said something to me in this last movie that was just, he hit it so on the head that it everything sort of made sense for me. We were making a film about pretty deplorable characters, pretty unlikable people, with Wall Street in the title, wondering if audiences would at all connect with these characters or this world or go along the journey with them. And he said to me, look, Leo, you know, I've done many films in my life, and I have to say, as long as you're honest and authentic about your portrayal of who these people are, no matter how despicable at times, no matter what part of, you know, the darker nature of humanity you're exploring, audiences will always connect with that and go along with that journey with you. And that's what I've found in my career. And I said, shit, that makes sense. I mean, here's a guy that came out of the gate with Mean Streets and did Taxi Driver, Last Temptation of Christ, and that was his motto. That's been his motto in filmmaking, and that's why his films last for such a long period of time. And everything kind of clicked for me with that one comment.
You know, I always say you have to be 100% abashedly yourself and have the gall to do that, because you're going to hear a lot of no's in your career. I've heard so many no's. I've heard that I was too fat, I was too sassy, I was too black, I was too much, too loud, too flamboyant. And those are my things that make me so special. Yeah. Those are the things that carry me throughout my career, to have this longevity, to have this moment, to win something that I've always wanted my entire life.
I encourage failure. That's why I was That's why I play the piano in there. Not because I can play. No, I'm for real. I'm trying to learn to play the piano. I'm 46. I started when I was 40. There's a lot of waiting on movie sets, so I figured I'd get a keyboard, and in between the waiting, I'd try to learn to play piano. And every day I'm better than I was yesterday. Still not any good by the standard of people who play on a stage like this, but I'm better than I was yesterday. And every time I see a piano in public, my hands start to shake, I start to sweat, I can feel my pulse, I can't slow it down, I can't find my calm, and I can practice alone. I'm like, man, I'm kind of learning this. And then I know a person is around and I just freeze up. And the reason I started to play piano, and one of my reach goals, is to try to just classically sit down with that single malt on the keyboard and be like, hey guys, how are you tonight? So I have to get over that fear. And that's me trying to get over that fear. Of course you learn from failure. You don't learn much from success at all. In 2009, I was told I would never work in movies again. And by the way, I earned that. Have you seen some of that stuff? No, I didn't like making movies because I was a young man going from town to town and audiences were berserk. Music hits, people go nuts. 25 minutes later, I'm like, we're gonna do it again tomorrow night, right? And I would. And then I got plucked from that thing that I was gaining fluency in, and that I really enjoyed, that energy that I really enjoyed. And I got put in an environment where it's like, we're here for 12 hours, and we're gonna do the same conversation for 12 hours. And then we're gonna do it tomorrow. Found me at the wrong time in my life. But you say we learn through failure. Boy, oh boy, am I grateful for every single time I can do something like this, every single frame I'm involved in, because I was told that I'd never do it again. I was told that I wasted my opportunity, and I did, I wasted it. And that was a watershed moment for me in WWE too, when they almost fired me. I got the job by accident, but I kept it through persistence. But it's about being vulnerable enough to express a piece of yourself where you can connect and be like, that's my guy, or F that guy. It took me losing the opportunity, like, you're out. Then you circle the wagons, you're like, oh, what can I do? I'll read the news, which I did. I'll host events, which I did. I'll do live audience participation TV shows, which I did. I'll do voiceover work, which I did. And then somebody saw a special and was like, I'd like him to audition for a small role. And I did. What's the best advice I ever got? Before, I would give a knee-jerk reaction answer to say, show up early and outwork everybody else. And that was given to me by Vince McMahon. And that's great advice. But I got to meet and receive a deck of cards from J.J. Abrams. And I asked him, because here's a guy who's seen it all, done it all. I asked him, what's the best piece of advice you ever got? And he was about ready to give me a knee-jerk response. He said, no, I take that back. It was from my wife, and it was, be authentic. Be yourself, and be brave enough to do that. And I told him I'm gonna steal it. I didn't steal it because I put him in my bibliography. I just gave him credit for it. But the best piece of advice I've ever been given is by J.J. Abrams telling me to be authentic and don't be afraid to be yourself, because yourself is enough.